الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستنصره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Respected scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I bid you congratulations on this auspicious arrival of the holy month of Ramadan, the month which honors the Muslims with the revelation of the Holy Quran. A few months ago, I happened upon a video clip of our teacher on the internet, on Twitter. And for those of you who don't know, Twitter is the sewer of Islamic discourse. Unfortunately, all of the worst behaviors and ideas with regards to the average Islamic discourse finds its way onto that website and on the internet generally, but it is a primary forum. And sadly, I find myself having no choice but to monitor that discourse in that forum because it includes all kinds of voices of those who have no education and are filled with zeal, and voices of those who are educated. Sometimes they have something good to offer, and a lot of times they contribute to more of the sewage. This clip was posted by what I would consider a deranged individual, and it was less than a minute long, but I immediately recognized the sermon in which it was quoting. It was a sermon given in the summer of 2019, the late summer of 2019, called On Slavery and a Moral Reading of the Quran. You might wonder, what is the clip? The segment that was cut out of context, but even without it being in context, doesn't really matter. Our teacher said that the Quran is a book of ethics, and it demands ethical readers. If you are not an ethical reader, the project of this book fails. If you do not have the moral sense to tell you that slavery is wrong, even if it was a historical necessity, quote unquote, even if it was a historical necessity, once upon a time, it was always an evil. Now, this initial individual, who, again, I will call him deranged, quoted this because he was upset that the Sheikh was speaking about the institution of slavery. And this person said that, look how he attacks an institution near and dear to my heart. Okay, one odd comment from a deranged individual. But the people that reposted and engaged with that clip, with that underlying clip, where the comment continues to be reposted, numerous individuals with high followings who have graduated from seminary educations and who teach your children continued to comment on the clip. Now, they ignored the comment about the institutions of slavery and how it is near and dear to this individual's heart. But one such individual simply wrote one sentence commenting on the clip and said, "Isn't this borderline kufr? Isn't this borderline disbelief?" Let me remind you what the clip said. The Quran is a book of ethics, and it demands ethical readers. If you are not an ethical reader, the project of this book fails. It's clear that everything is stuck on the semantics of this book fails. If you do not have the moral sense to tell you that slavery is wrong, even if it was a historical necessity, once upon a time, it was always an evil. It wasn't just him. People started to comment under his long following, including another teacher of your children, who has nearly 80,000 followers on Twitter, who has an affiliation with one of the mosques in New Jersey and teaches classes there. I repeat, these people educate your children. And he answers the question of, isn't this borderline kufr? With one word, yes. Another one says i'tizal. Another one just says his aqidah is the aqidah of the Mu'tazila, who are a dead sect, and for good reason, because they were deviants. Well, this is the discourse, and this is the back and forth, and I'm glad that people are listening, but I am somewhat sad that this is all they can do in order to really engage with the work. But since they are interested, I'd like to take the opportunity to investigate this claim of borderline kufr. See, this is what happens when your understanding of Islam is governed and ruled by tired dogma and cheap semantics. Cheap semantics, rather than serious and truly reverent engagement with Al-Quran al-Hakim. Since we are in the holy month of Ramadan, let us turn to the surah which enjoins us to sanctify this holy month by fasting. Maybe perhaps Surah Al-Baqarah can shine its light for us in order to help distinguish what is kufr and what is not kufr. May God deliver us from this wretched state. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. لعلكم تتقون. God has prescribed for you fasting as he has prescribed to the nations and the people before you, so that maybe you may develop taqwa. Taqwa is a word that we throw around, or is thrown around, I should say, depending on whether you know what it means or not. It's thrown around quite often, and it's paid lip service. Now, I just want to remind you, we are investigating the surah, and we're keeping in mind the quote about the Quran as a book of ethics that demands ethical readers. If you are not an ethical reader, the project of the book fails. Remember, this is what we are thinking about. After the Fatiha, the very first verse, after Alif Lam Mim, of course, the very first verse of the entire book says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Huda, of course, is guidance. For who? هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. For those with taqwa. Is the guidance for those without taqwa? There's a requisite. There's a prerequisite to accessing the guidance of this holy book. Let's see if using our teacher's methodology of a coherent surah can help establish this possibility further. Starting off with thinking about taqwa. In the translations that I find good translations, Muhammad Asad's translation for taqwa is God consciousness. The old translations of Pickthall considers taqwa to mean warding off evil. The study Quran calls it reverence. Many others colloquially call it fearing God, taqillah, fear God. No, ittaqa means to prevent. But what? Prevent what? Moving on to the 21st verse of Surah Al-Baqarah. It says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اعْبُدُوا رَبَّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. O humankind, serve your Lord who created you and those before you, so that you might be tattaqun, so that you might be conscious of Him, so that you might have taqwa. U'budu, ibadah. Again, another word that has various meanings. Colloquially for us, it means worship, but it also means service. Think about these as we go through, because there is a cumulative point here. About 9 verses later, on the 30th verse, there is the very famous verse, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً قَالُوا أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ قَالَ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. God says to the angels, I am establishing on earth a deputy or a vicegerent. They say to him, you would establish therein one who spreads corruption and sheds blood, while we exalt your praise and sanctify your holiness? God says, verily, I know that which you do not know. Notice the juxtaposition that the angels make. They contrast corruption and violence with steady remembrance, consistent remembrance, and God consciousness. That means God consciousness and steady remembrance are completely inconsistent with corruption and violence. The word taqwa continues to appear in Surah Al-Baqarah repetitively in one form or another. The other thing that's very interesting about Surah Al-Baqarah, as of course many of you know, especially given the fact that most people engage in the ritual of reading all of the Quran in the holy month of Ramadan, I'm sure you've probably passed through Baqarah by now. The first thing you notice is that it's very, very heavy on legal prescriptions. And in fact, it is probably the surah that is the first surah that comes as such to provide legal prescriptions, and in that number. So let us see this insistence on repeating taqwa, taqwa, taqwa over and over again, beginning the surah with hudan lil muttaqeen, guidance for those with taqwa. And one of the primary motifs and functions of the surah being that it brings legal prescriptions. Using just very straight, rational thinking, one would wonder whether there is a relationship between taqwa and the legal prescriptions. So we need to figure out what is taqwa and how does it relate to these legal prescriptions. Let's take a sample. Verse 144 and verse 150 as well. This prescription establishes the qibla for the prayer. Mind you, again, remember that we just said in one of the previous verses that serving and worshiping God has a purpose. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you will have taqwa. And we know in other surahs, for example, Surah Taha in verse 15, it says that أَقِيمَ الصَّلَاةِ لِذِكْرِي, establish prayer for my remembrance, for you to remember me, be cognizant of me, being God. And in Surah Al-Ankabut, إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ تَنْهَى عَلَى الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ, that certainly prayer and dhikr, therefore, is meant to deter indecency and weakness and wickedness. Again, relate these statements to the statement of the juxtaposition that the angels make in dhikr versus fasad, which is remembrance versus corruption, harm. So first we begin with the qibla. There is an issue about the qibla. Which way do we turn? I don't know which way to turn. Should it be this way? Should it be that way? Oh my God, I'm going to give up hope because we used to be praying towards Masjid al-Aqsa, and now we're praying towards the Kaaba, and we're disrupting the rituals. And now none of our prayers are going to reach God. And this is proof that this is no longer working. What is the purpose of prayer? Next, legal prescription. Verse 173 talks about dietary prohibitions, in particular that of carrion, blood, and swine for the sake of physical and spiritual health. But still, it has a flexible exception in case you have no choice and you need to eat. It takes in the consideration that if you need to eat it, then you can. Let's look at verse 177. And this is where it really heats up, in my opinion. Verse 177 talks about the concept of birr. Many consider that to mean piety or righteousness. And I will read for you what this surah says about birr, this ayah in particular. It says that it is not birr that you turn your faces to the east and west. Remember, again, we're talking about those who are looking for the direction of prayer. Where is the qibla? Which way do I pray? In which way will my prayers be accepted? In which way will it be effective? Yes, obviously we know we are ultimately given the prescription. You pray towards Mecca. But it is not birr that you obsess over turning your faces to the east and west. But birr, righteousness and piety, is the one who believes in God and the last day, accountability, and the angels and the scripture, the guidance which is provided, and the prophets, the example, the moral example, and those who give wealth from that of which they love, and they give it to their close family, they give it to the orphans, they give it to the needy, they give it to the wayfarer and the refugee, and they set slaves free, and they observe proper worship and service, and they pay charity to those who need it. There are also those who keep their perseverance and their promise when they make one, and they are patient in tribulation and in adversity and in times of stress. Such are they who are sincere, and such are those who are muttaqun, and such are those who have taqwa. There's a marriage here between birr and taqwa. There is no birr without taqwa. So we've now learned who are those who are abrar, who are those who have piety, and how did they get there? Again, it says, أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُتَّقُونَ. Taqwa was the function by which they achieve this birr. Let's move on to another verse on legal prescriptions, verse 178. This verse is about murder and killing. And it offers a new systematic way of thinking about punishment and about retribution. Many times during that time, there would be blood feuds that would ensue as a result of a wrongful death or a murder or highway robbery, something of the sort, in which different clans would war with one another because they felt that maybe one of them was worth 10 of their people. And it would be a perpetual cycle of violence. Instead, in this verse, God offers a new way of thinking, just and equitable retribution that is proportional, a one-for-one proportion. It is trying to maintain the fact that human beings need to be accountable for their crimes, but also try to end the cycle of violence, which will inevitably lead to more and more death, destruction, and of course, in violent moments when corruption is spread, there is a lot less taqwa, because there is something that's cut between the human being and their source of mercy and guidance. No, it offered the flexible thing of reality of a life for a life, and also the opportunity for perhaps not even trading a life, but equitable retribution in this form of monetary damages. Again, think about taqwa and these legal prescriptions. Verse 179, it goes further and it says, just proportional retribution saves lives. It gives life. This is what I just talked about. And in this verse specifically, it says, وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاةٌ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Again, a juxtaposition between taqwa and transgression and going too far. Don't go beyond these limits. Think again to the angelic concern about bloodshed. Taqwa saves lives. Disproportionality is a harmful transgression, and it fuels that cycle of violence. Verse 180, a legal prescription to leave behind a will. For what reason? Family members often get into bitter fights. Till today, it's been 1,400 years. The human being has not changed. They get in fights over the division of a decedent's estate. The verse yet again says it's a duty upon the muttaqeen. Upon the muttaqeen. The people who have taqwa have the duty to foresee the possibility that violence, corruption, anger, lies will emerge as a result of an unfair distribution after the death of the one who the estate belonged to. They should take responsibility and avoid and repel that possibility. We come to the verse that we've quoted at the very beginning of the khutbah, verse 183, the ritual prescription of fasting. There's a series of verses, of course. And yet again, you see that that verse is formed, the very beginning verse, in its style is very similar to the first verses at the beginning, in which it says that God is telling you, is asking you to worship and serve him so that you might find taqwa. Language is exactly the same. He has placed upon you, he has prescribed upon you fasting so that you may perhaps find taqwa. Why does in that series of verses God insert a verse that asks the one who is fasting, or in general, but it says that for my servant who supplicates to me, let him know that I am near and that I will answer him or her. As we're going through this, I want to think about it, because when we are asked to do things like keep ourselves accountable in terms of just and equitable retribution, we're changing our culture. In that time, they were changing their culture. This was the way of life. Blood feuds were a way of life. To suddenly change that would be a complete upheaval of the way that you understand reality. Think even now, the oft recited hadith about it's very important to learn how to ride on a horse and shoot a bow and arrow and swing a sword. Is it important now? On that same level, that every child should know how to kill another human being? This day and age, we're not there anymore. There's a reason why. Because of verses like this that established that there's no need to be in a perpetual state of war. So it leaves our consciousness as part of our culture. It's not valued in the same way. God is telling you to supplicate to him because if you are having difficulty in rearranging the molecules in your brain that allow you to think in the manner of taqwa, he's asking you to ask him to help you. That is what it is. For if that was, it would just be, if it meant what we typically take it to mean, then it would just be a cheat code. I just say the particular ritual and then God gives me what he wants, what I want, as if he's Santa Claus. This isn't how this works. Think. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. أستغفر لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على الأشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين. So a reminder, in the first khutbah, we began by talking about the statement that said that the Quran needs an ethical reader. And the project fails if you are not an ethical reader. And we decided to attack this precept, this assertion, by looking at Surah Al-Baqarah, as it's the very first chapter, and in the very first two verses, it says, Hudan lil muttaqeen, that the Quran, the revelation, is Hudan lil muttaqeen. It's guidance for those who have taqwa. And we recognize that in this holy month, since we are fasting, it is a legal prescription. It is a ritual. We learn that legal rituals have a purpose. The purpose is to establish taqwa and dhikr, remembrance of God. We talked about how the angels took exception or showed concern about someone who has the possibility of ghifla, someone who has the possibility of forgetting rather than remembrance, as they are constantly in a state of remembrance and taqdees and tahmeed and tasbih. They are constantly in a state of remembering and exalting God. And they showed fear that those who are not constantly in that state their actions would result in corruption and bloodshed, endless bloodshed, harm. We move on to some of these legal prescriptions to see what is the relationship between taqwa and legal prescriptions. Why so much taqwa in this chapter and why so many legal prescriptions? What is the point? Verse 187, sexual ethics while fasting is regulated, is a regulatory prescription depending on time and place. But the prescription has also revealed the errant belief, the mythology or the khurafa, the superstition that when one is fasting, that during the time that one is fasting, they cannot have an intimate relationship with their partner. So the belief was that during the entire month of Ramadan, that one would completely abstain from any signs of intimacy from their partner. And God rejects that. He says this has no basis. He offers yet again another solution to a silly problem. Let's go to another pivotal verse, another legal prescription. 188. Verse 188. It says, "Do not use your wealth for immorality and vanity. Do not eat it amongst yourself, hoard it, and use it in your way amongst yourself," the elite. "Nor bribe al-hukam," which I define as rulers or judges or the powerful or the influential. Do not bribe them in order to steal others' property and wealth. Again, we should not squander our wealth. That seems obvious. But we should be very careful how we are using our wealth. Because if we are not careful, we will try to serve our own interests, as many have. Look at the Israeli lobby in this country. Millions and millions and millions of dollars have gone towards buying politicians and entertainers and all of the like in order to provide them cover to steal the wealth and the land of the Palestinians. It couldn't be more obvious and direct. Is that something that somebody does that has taqwa, that has God consciousness and reverence? Now, let me open a parenthesis here just for a moment in order to make this khutbah have some relevance to our day and age at the current moment. We are 160 days into a brutal genocide. And we've been talking for years about how to defeat the Israeli lobby. And not a lot has been done. We've spent years talking about what we need to do is to get on Capitol Hill, and we need to duke it out, and we need to give Chuck Schumer more money than the Israeli lobby does. And that will start to turn things. Maybe that's possible. I don't know. I don't feel very hopeful about it these days. Maybe I did before the 7th. But watching the way that everything has unfolded today, I'm not really sure if that is the way forward at this moment. What I think a long-term plan, a better long-term plan, would be to take that wealth that we would take to lobby the political elite in this country. It would be to try to recognize who are those amongst us who have taqwa, who have righteousness, bir, who behave with ihsan, who are rational, moral human beings with a connection with the purposes of the Quran, and put them and educate them and invest in them and put them in positions, starting from, I don't care, from the very bottom of the totem pole, in the school systems, put them in the city councils, put them in the local politics, state legislature, and let them build over time. We cannot just jump into Congress all of a sudden. I'm glad that there are a handful of Muslims that are advocating for us, and I think it shows that they're trailblazers. It shows that it does make a difference. It works. Since when have you ever seen a kufiya at the State of the Union address? Yes, I know that kufiya is not going to save everyone's life immediately, but there are steps. We cannot just jump and expect that everybody else takes their time and builds and does things in order. But we think we can just suddenly waltz in and that there's a cheat code somehow. There's no cheat code. Long term, we need to invest in the people that can represent us in this non-representative democracy. This democracy is only representative when it has people in it that have your values. If they do not have your values, they will not represent you. They will pretend to represent you because that is the constitutional shield in which they hide behind. Ultimately, they really only care about who is going to get them elected and who is going to fill their pockets. It's not that difficult. Our community needs to build human beings and replace them with the robots that are on Capitol Hill. And that doesn't just stop with the United States, Canada, the UK, other democratic nations. That's the long term. The short term, I recommend that you speak with your circles about this. There needs to be lines. There needs to be repercussions. We've mostly agreed that this year we are not voting for Joe Biden, even if he calls for a ceasefire, even if he calls for Netanyahu to be unseated. It doesn't matter. These are all shows. They thoroughly allowed for this. And let's be clear, that port that he said he's going to build in order to bring in aid is not a port for aid. It is a port to be able to extract the natural gas that is in the waters that it surrounds. Wake up. We're not voting for Biden. Let us also consider, from now on, we are not voting, period, unless a candidate has been okay, at least has called for a ceasefire in the early months when it was already obvious that this was a genocide. But beyond that, we will not vote for a candidate that supports Israeli occupation. This is the red line. Yes, I am saying to be a one-issue voter. Be a one-issue voter. Because I ask you, which one of your issues has been relieved by the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, for that matter? Any of them? Your school debts, your health care, the economy? Have they done anything okay even? Do you feel more or less safe in this country since October 7th? It's a total F. We are not saving anything by preventing Trump from coming in. In fact, Trump coming in may possibly get the people who are asleep in this country, those who are privileged in this country, to wake up and pretend to care about ethics, as they did when Trump was in power. With all of those poor migrant children locked up in those jails, they had every photo op with them that they could possibly muster in order to show that Trump was an evil, immoral human being, and we are the alternative. Those children are still rotting in those jails. Those children have to sit in an immigration court with no lawyer, unable to understand English, and are deported in less than 5 minutes. That's the Democratic Party. So, we don't care about that. We don't care about healthcare. If there's one thing that we could finally grow enough courage to admit, is that the worst line, the last line, is a Holocaust. This is a Holocaust. The Holocaust happens because of Israeli occupation and siege on Palestinian territory. Let it be known, moving forward, I cannot make decisions on behalf of all Muslims, but this is my sincere recommendation, and think about it. We will not support a political candidate who does not begin with the bare minimum. The bare minimum is no more occupation, no more siege. That will show the power. Let us at least learn if we have power in voting or not. Let's conduct an experiment. If we succeed in making them sweat, that will give us the psychological momentum to continue to work together and put aside petty differences, like this individual who says, is this borderline kufr? Is this borderline kufr? Asking the Muslim to be an ethical reader of the Quran, or else the project fails. Is this borderline kufr? Well, I'll tell you what I think is borderline kufr. Continuing to vote for these out of fear that you may not be able to move back and forth from your countries safely. My grandmother won't be able to come. Well, let your grandmother stay where she is. Genocide and Holocaust is the worst. There's nothing worse than that. Do not use your wealth and immorality, your wealth for immorality and vanity. Do not waste it on them. Let's return back to Surah Al-Baqarah and look at some of these legal prescriptions to see if there's a connection between taqwa and the prescriptions. I will return to verse 189 because I think it's very important, but very quickly, just to show you that literally every single legal prescription has a link. Verses 190 through 194, proportional military action to address and alleviate unjust violent action taken against you. Never be the aggressor. Taqwa. Flexible ritual laws in verses 196 through 203. Flexible ritual laws and prescriptions for the pilgrimage. We already discussed that acts of ibadah, ritual, are meant to develop taqwa. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ اُعْبُدُوا رَبَّكُمْ. Verse 215, it says they will ask what they should spend on others. And God responds, give of your wealth to your parents, your kinsfolk, orphans, and the indigent, and the refugee. Again, that is a legal prescription. That's not a suggestion. That is what you must do. Alleviate poverty and need and circulate your wealth. Verse 216 through 217, fighting in the sacred months are forbidden. But if not fighting will lead to fitna, which is an unaddressed injustice. Fitna is an unaddressed injustice. In this case of this verse, the fitna had the intention of causing Muslims to denounce their faith, to turn them away from the haram, to turn them away from the Kaaba of Mecca, and expel the people from there. And in that case, fighting is better than the fitna. This is a legal prescription that is teaching you self-defense, protection of your holy space. Protect your holy space. Do not just leave it for those people who live in that holy space. You protect the holy space. Now, think, how can you protect the holy space if you are not physically there? You can't pick up a gun and walk into the haram and say, from now on, I'm going to protect this haram. But there is an action that we can take, just like voting is abstention. We have already decided as a community that voting abstention is something that could work. And even if it doesn't work, just based on our moral principles, we will send a message to Joe Biden and the government of the United States that this is too far. Then it shouldn't be that difficult to send a message to the rulers of Saudi Arabia that what they have done with our holy sites is too far. The fact that they have hid behind the sacred places of our holy sites and they open up Starbucks parentheses. Turkish woman goes to Medina for the first time and is in utter shock that a stone's throw away from the Prophet's grave in the Prophet's mosque, a stone's throw. She actually shows you, here's the Prophet's grave, and here's a Starbucks. And these people will not shut up about what is innovation and not innovation. You are desecrating our holy... We are supposed to be, again, all together by consensus of the Muslims, boycotting Starbucks. But Starbucks is fully operating within a stone's throw of the Prophet's resting place. What bigger blasphemy could there be? And beyond that, could Israel do what it has done without the support of Saudi Arabia? If they halted their oil production for a single day, this world would turn upside down. Think about it. Think about what this surah is telling you. It is providing you guidance if you are a muttaqi. Verse 219 is a prohibition of gambling and alcohol. The relationship to taqwa there is pretty obvious. Spend your money on God's causes instead of spending it on partying, drinking, and wasting it away at the gambling table. Verse 220, what to do with orphans? Improve their condition, God says. Set them up for success. You should treat and spend on them the way that you would treat a family member in need. That is what that verse says, not just throw some money towards an orphanage. 221, marry a spouse that will bring you closer to God, not invite you towards hellfire. 222, sexual ethics regulating men bothering women for intimacy while they are menstruating. Seems silly now, but at that time, it was a problem. Verses 226 through 237, an extension prescription, very extensive prescriptions about divorce. And it's meant to protect women from vulnerable circumstances. And the spouses are enjoined to be kind to each other throughout the process, so as to what? So as to not cause further damage and harm. It is a very difficult and painful process going through a divorce. 238 through 239, another flexible accommodation for prayer. Prayer on horseback when necessary. Verses 240 through 241, again, a command to leave behind something for your wife if you are close to death, and the same for a divorced wife. And that is, again, a duty upon the muttaqeen. Verse 275, the prohibition of usury, interest. Big banks are taking, you can pay and pay and pay towards your house, and the vast majority of that money is going towards paying off your interest. You're not even making a small portion of the money that you're paying is going towards the total value of what you own on the house. This is obvious. 282, laws about recording debt with contracts and witnesses. Again, a very flexible law. And yet again, this law mentions taqwa. Okay, I wanted to return to one last verse. Verse 189. There was a practice in Medina that when people would return from travel or they would return from visiting the holy Kaaba, that they would not enter their homes from the front door. I don't know why. They would jump over the wall, or they would cut another hole from the back door and make a secondary door. Anything to avoid going in through the front door. What is that? What do we call that in our modern tongue? Khurafa. That's a superstition. It's a superstitious value. No one can explain why you should not enter through the front door. When you ask them to provide burhan, when you ask them to provide some sort of indicator as to why they're doing that, a proof, they can't give you one. This verse comes and says, this is not bir. It is not righteous or pious to observe the superstitious ritual of avoiding walking through the front door. That's not bir. Enter the front door. You see, God uses this superstitious ritual as a metaphor. Entering the back door towards piety is endlessly obsessing over the mechanics of ritual rather than recognizing that the purpose of observing ritual is to develop taqwa, which by definition makes one pious. So the pious and God-conscious person does not dilly-dally with complicating questions about the mechanics of the ritual, because in reality, those questions are actually projections of doubt and a lack of willingness to submit to a rational, purposeful ritual and decision-making. Instead, the one with piety wastes no time and focuses their attention on the purpose of obediently fulfilling the ritual and observing taqwa. And this is the crux of the narrative about Al-Baqarah, in which the surah is named after. Everybody knows the famous story. God tells Bani Israel to sacrifice a cow, and they put it off by asking question after question. What size? What color? In which way? Should it be young? Should it be old? All these cows look similar to me. I don't really know how to... And at the end, it says that they did it. They followed the command, but they almost didn't. So don't be one of those that almost didn't. Rush to do it at the beginning. And you rush to do it at the beginning if you have taqwa. If you don't have taqwa, you dilly-dally and you say, is this borderline kufr? Is this okay with the aqidah of tahawiyah? Is this the books of aqaid, the books of dogma? Is this You can't say Quran project. You can't say Quran fails. That's kufr. That is entering Islam from the back door. Enter Islam from the front door, purposefully. Throughout these verses, Surah Al-Baqarah consistently contrasts taqwa with its opposite, i'tada. And also bir. It contrasts it with harm or a sin, ithm. If you reflect carefully on each and every commandment and legal prescription in Baqarah, in Surah Al-Baqarah, without exception, the goal of each verse is to develop a society of bir, of righteousness, of piety, through the practice of taqwa. And what does taqwa do? Here's our conclusion. Taqwa repels aggression. Taqwa repels harm. Remember at the beginning, I said that the root, ittaqa, means to prevent. Even colloquially, it means to repel. To repel aggression, because aggression always leads and results towards ithm. Aggression, of course, without taqwa. The connection between dhikr, remembering, and taqwa and bir is clear. And it makes sense why the angels contrasted a constant state of dhikr with corruption and bloodshed. Very quickly, Hassan Farhan al-Maliki, the Saudi researcher, defined taqwa as repelling and preventing harm and aggression. He actually said, كَفَ الْأَذَى وَالْعُدْوَانِ is the purpose of taqwa, which is halting harm and aggression. And he called it al-ghayat al-wusta. This is the middle or moderate purpose and goal. Of course, somebody like that would be reeling and languishing in Saudi prisons, while Muslims are drinking Starbucks on their way to the Prophet's grave to pray for their families and whatever else. But not for Gaza, by the way. If you pray for Gaza, you'll be arrested. That is actually what is happening in your holy sites. So Muhammad Asad's translation of God consciousness, a good one. Pickthall's warding off evil, a good one. And even the colloquial fearing of God, all accessible and all acceptable. But taqwa is functionally based on what we have observed in Surah Al-Baqarah, that every law and every ritual and every prescription is something that leads towards bir. A life of bir is constantly relieving poverty, alienation, destitution, difficulty, harm, emotional harm. It is repelling these aggressions that lead to corruption in society and to bloodshed and fighting. If people don't have something that is causing them pain and harm, they will not cause others pain and harm. If people are looked after and their needs are looked after by the muttaqeen, they will become muttaqi. They will enter their religion through the front door, and they will come to this religion. So back to the original statement. What did we say that the original statement was that was borderline kufr? An ethical reader. The Quran demands an ethical reader. Or else, if you are not an ethical reader, the project of this book fails. If you're so upset about the semantics, it fails you, and you fail it. If it's not clear, what is the fail? Think again about verse 30, the angels. We've said it now multiple times. The angel said corruption and bloodshed versus constant dhikr and remembrance. In the verses that follow, God talks to the angels further and says, I know that which you do not. And God continues to teach Adam, or human beings, the intuitive understanding and learning and knowledge, which is God's attributes, God's names, God's attributes, which include all of these concepts that we have talked about: goodness, kindness, repelling harm, accountability. These are in the fitrah, in the intuition of the human being. There's only a question about why it is not accessible to you. In our humanness, we have resorted to ritual observances, then and now, ritual observances of khurafa, of superstition. Those superstitions have deluded our character, our moral character, because we are performing actions without thinking, without purpose. A purposeless action is very different than a purposeful action. Taqwa is a purposeful action. So yes, the Quran does provide guidance, but it fails to reach the one who lacks the requisite taqwa. Put differently, the project of delivery, the delivery of guidance, that's the project. Said about the word project. The project of the delivery of the guidance fails to connect with the one with a lack of requisite of morality and ethics. If you do not have the requisite morality and ethics, taqwa and huda will not reach you. And that is why in this holy month, to remedy our ability to connect with the Quran, God says that I have prescribed for you fasting. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. استغفر الله وأتوب إليه. Ya Rab, in this month, I ask that all of us find it in ourselves to remember that we were created with intuition, knowledge that we all have access to. Every single one of us, regardless of our education, we have access to this intuition, this moral intuition. The way forward is to recognize, Ya Rab, let us know this. We are obstructing our own intuitions. Allow us to tear down those walls of obstruction with the fire that burns away our sin, with the fire of remembrance that burns away our selfishness, and replace it with selflessness, and replace it with taqwa and truth and birr and piety. Help us to be those who repel and prevent harm, and allow us to be those who achieve your countenance and your mercy and your pleasure. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa aqim as-salah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله من الصلاة قام الصلاة قام الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
نويت أن أصلي صلاة الجمعة ركعتين قربة إلى الله وجهت وجهي لله فاطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا مسلما الصلاة والنسك ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين لا شريك له مالك الملك حمد والحمد لله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين وآتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بعهدهم إذا عاهدوا والصابرين في البأساء والضراء وحين البأس أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. استغفر الله. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون أياما معدودات فمن كان منكم مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر وعلى الذين يطيقونه فدية طعام مسكين فمن تطوع خيرا فهو خير له وأن تصوموا خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعان فليستجيبوا لي وليؤمنوا بي لعلهم يرشدون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.